Can you put up the agenda, please?
Yep. So we are recording and we are live, just waiting for our attendees to populate the room.
Wonderful. Excuse my mysterious lighting here. I'm doing my best in the rental.
The beauty of blurred backgrounds.
Yes.
I'm not seeing any attendees. Oh, looks like we have Anita Currier.
There's Brian. Hey, Brian.
Excuse me. Hey, Suzanne. Wrong pipe, not COVID.
Oh, Robert Currier. That's, yeah.
Suzanne and Madeline, I'll defer to you on agenda discussion and so forth.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we have a quorum here. It doesn't look like we do yet. Still waiting on Karen, Mio. We have the mayor. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I guess we do have a quorum. Robert, is that you?
That's me.
Okay, just making sure.
It's under my wife's name because she's got the computer.
Okay. Hey, Mio.
Hi.
Welcome, welcome. I guess I'm going to just get us started. I know Karen will probably join momentarily. Is that okay? It is
Yes.
6:02. Okay. Calling the meeting, the January meeting of the Newburyport Affordable Housing Trust to order. Welcome everybody again to this wonderful new year, new group, new mayor. I'd like to introduce or welcome Mayor Sean Reardon to the Housing Trust. We're happy to have you in the seat and welcome your feedback, questions, and anything you'd like to say before we get started.
No, just thank you for the nice welcome. I'm incredibly happy to be here. This is obviously a huge, issue, not only in Newburyport, but across the state. So I'm just excited to be part of these conversations and I look forward to working with everybody.
Thank you.
We appreciate and we thank you for making affordable housing one of your top priorities. So welcome to this wonderful table. Let's go around just really quickly for Mayor's education and just to let him get to know everybody a little bit. If you would just say your name and kind of a little bit about your background and what brings you to the trust. I'll start. Suzanne Cameron. I'm a community development professional. I have lots of experience in residential mortgage lending, residential real estate, advocacy, and all around love for this topic. Madeline.
Thanks, Suzanne, and welcome everyone. My name is Madeline Nash. I've been a member of the Housing Trust since it was formed in 2010. Before that, I was a member of the Community Preservation Committee, and before that, I was a member of the Planning Board. And I have a background in affordable housing development, having worked for a couple of different community development corporations in Massachusetts. And right now I'm working for a nonprofit that lends to other nonprofits who are developing affordable housing around the state. So this is my passion. And I'm really excited to have some new members and to have the new mayor here, new energy. And we have some exciting opportunities in front of us. And I'll pass it on to Karen Weiner.
Hi, thanks, Madeline. Hi, everybody. Good to see everyone. I work for a nonprofit organization called CHAPA, Citizens Housing and Planning Association. I've been there for 30 plus years. I started when I was in diapers. And it is the statewide nonprofit affordable housing and community development organization. So we're a big membership organization. Folks like Madeline and Suzanne work for companies who are members of CHAPA. We do a lot of work, policy work, and also some programmatic work. And what I hope I bring to the trust is that while I certainly don't know everything by any means that there is to know about affordable housing, I probably know somebody who knows the answer to whatever we're looking for just through my work. So hopefully that is helpful.
Thank you, Karen. Brian?
Good evening, good evening, everybody. My name is Brian Raish. I'm living in Newburyport since 2007. I sell residential real estate at William Ravis. Most of my work's in Newburyport, but I do a lot of pro bono help in Haverhill. I was on the board of Dinah's House, which is a drop-in center for women, mostly single women, help them with housing issues, sometimes rentals or evictions, those kinds of things. I'm a rector of a church in Reading, and I do a lot of fundraising for nonprofits. So how about Andrew?
Maybe Mio?
Sure. My name is Mio Young, and I live in Newburyport. Been here about over 25 years. My professional career was in international finance and also nonprofit finance locally. I worked at the Coastal Educational Collaborative, Jeannie Geiger Crisis Center as the finance director, and I have been on the board of Roof Overhead Collaborative for 8 years, and also the board of the YWCA for 6 years. I'll be coming off of that board in April. But I'll stay on their Affordable Housing Committee, which I've been on for 6 years. That's it. And I just joined in November, December
Yes.
of this, last year.
Yes. Thank you, Mio. Sean, just so you know, Brian, Mio, and Robert, who we're about to hear from, are all brand new to the trust. So we'll turn it over to Robert.
You hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Now you're muted again, Bob. Unmute.
I'm mute. All right,
There
there
you
we go. My name is Bob Currier. I've lived in Newburyport for about almost 50 years. I used to work I retired from Stratford Capital, which is a venture capital funded LLC that does only affordable housing. And I was in charge of the real estate division of that, where I went out and found sites, schools, and as well as raw land, but primarily older buildings that we could do historical rehab on, and then convert them into affordable housing. So I know the process, and I am a strong advocate of affordable housing, and I try to talk to other communities around to figure out what they're doing to help us do what we should be doing. And communities like Lexington and Framingham really done some very interesting things, which I can get into later. But I've got a good background, and I'm a strong advocate for affordable housing.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you all. We have such a great, strong, talented group of people here. And I'm just really, really proud that we're starting the year off together. I know the Brown School is next. I know Madeline just had a couple of top line observations and that she wanted to make just again for the to benefit the new members and also the mayor. So Madeline, did you want to go through just a couple minutes of that? Yeah,
sure. Just briefly, because we have some new members and we're our first meeting with Mayor Reardon, just briefly some background on the trust, and we are planning to go into this in more detail at our next meeting, which we're hoping to have the first week of March. But some of the things that the trust has worked on in the past is creating and administering a down payment assistance program for first-time home buyers who are purchasing affordable housing units in Newburyport. So those are deed restricted units. And that's something that we have administered with funding that we've applied for from the Community Preservation Committee. And that I think has been impactful. We also created an emergency rental relief program when COVID first hit the community, and we have been working on that and with Pettingill House. In the last year, I think we worked with about 30 households, and about 70 individuals included in those households were assisted through our rental relief program. And we are now gearing up to administer some new components to that program, again, working with Pettingill House. And we'll be talking about that some more at our next meeting. And we were waiting to announce that to the Planning and Development Committee of the City Council. We have done community education around the need for affordable housing, and we've worked on the creation of 2 housing production plans, and now we're gearing up to do that for a 3rd housing production plan. And we created the Community Partners Grant program. So we've been doing a number of different things, and we also provided some community education and advocacy around the Brown School. So we have a draft strategic plan for the next year, for the year coming, the year ahead of us. It's a set of goals and action steps, and it's very much in draft form. It was sent out to you by Caitlin Sullivan from the planning department, just so that you could take a look at it, give you an idea of what we've been thinking about, and then we'll discuss it at our next meeting, which again, I hope is going to be the first week of March. And so I'm hoping to get input from you all. And that's really all I wanted to say, to sort of set the stage a little bit before we got into our agenda.
Madeline, will you want input before the meeting or?
We'll take input
during.
anytime.
Okay.
Yeah, I think before would be great, just because what we're going to do with that, the list of goals that we have for the year is kind of delegate to them to by quarter. So we'll have first quarter goals, second quarter goals, et cetera. And so that we can just stay on track. So anything you would like to add to that, it would be good. Probably earlier, but anytime is fine. Thank you, Madeline, for that. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Andy Port to talk about the Brown School.
Sure, thank you. Let me just pull up a graphic on the screen just for reference. Actually, you know what? Let me use the pictometry view. So just a visual there of the property. Hope you can all see that. So we're all generally familiar with the property, but there's a couple of things that I think are worth noting here. Obviously, with youth services out of the building, at least I'll give you my 2 cents. I certainly think that housing is the most appropriate and viable adaptive reuse of the building, the original school building. Obviously, there's an ongoing discussion between the mayor and the council and others about what may happen with the gym space. But I think it's worth noting that and the expectation that some of the grounds be maintained for the neighborhood. These are all things that have been voted on or policy-wise been acted on in one form or another by the council over time. And so there is some zoning over the property that was adopted relatively recently. I think with the assumption that youth services would stay, there was a cap of 20 units put on that overlay district. So 20 units at full build out for the property, regardless of how things might be configured. That for context, and some of the trust members already know this, but there was some discussion about with nonprofits and with developers about whether that threshold would be viable for them, whether they might need, in fact, a few more units in order to make the project financially feasible. So that and the sort of overlapping neighborhood or community expectations of the property have been a source of debate over the last number of years, and part of the reason why we have not been able to move forward on adaptive reuse of the property one way or the other, because those overlapping interests in some ways can conflict with each other. There's a almost a mutual exclusiveness to it, in the sense that there's only a limited amount of space on the property. So things like whether the gym is retained or not may impact, what space is left over for, park space or outdoor space beyond, what needs to be maintained, the basketball courts and playground, what might be available for parking spaces for units and whatnot. So that's just some of the general context here. We did do some feasibility studies over the years, one looking at housing specifically, and I had a couple of the renderings to pull up if you want of the schematic floor plans that they provided to us for market rate, affordable, artist live work units or senior units. Again, just as schematic, options for us to give us an idea of how classrooms might be laid out, how many units might fit there, what sort of scale or size the units might be, and what amenities they might have, just to give us an idea of what might be viable. We also had a feasibility study for use focused on youth services and their potential to stay in the building and adaptive reuse the building or part of it. So there's reports and schematic plans going with all that, and including some assessment of the structure, utilities in the building and things like that would have to be upgraded in one use or another. So that's just generally some background. Two other things I think are worth noting is that there was an RFP process done several years ago where the city has solicited proposals from nonprofits and developers. At the time, we got 3 proposals for adaptive reuse of the property. At that time, the assumption was, and we had actually ended up selecting one of those proposals to work forward with, and then that was abandoned before that really moved ahead. The 3 proposals were focused on adaptive reuse of the primary building for housing with the youth services to stay on the main floor and or the gym space somewhere on the site, essentially reconfigured. And so there were different scenarios, more or less shown in those developer plans. But NOAS would have stayed on the site, and there was generally an assumption that the gym space would be, added to or modified somehow in the back to accommodate their needs on site. The context of why that was abandoned was generally that youth services, the director had expressed concern about that tightness of the site limiting their ability to have future expansion or needs addressed. So that was the change of course at that point. And then of course, Mayor Holliday, when she was here, had been pursuing the Low Street property as a potential location for youth services. And obviously since that whole effort began, youth services has since left the building because the heating system had failed, and it's a relatively old heating system that is problematic to fix at this point, both costly and problematic to find the parts for. So the only other thing I think is worth noting, and I'm happy to answer any other questions and assist, but definitely happy to help with adaptive reuse of the property, regardless of what the mayor and the council decide to do with it, regardless of what parameters are set up. But definitely think housing is a strong need, as the mayor and other members here have said. It is a strong need the community has. It's the only municipal property we have that's available for this purpose, right now in any substantial way in the foreseeable future. So there's clearly one of the assets we have to make affordable housing would be this property. And so what the parameters are that we set up are obviously going to be important going forward. But one other thing I did think was important to note for those of you, just as a reminder for some of you, is we do have about $230,000 or so from a state grant program. I'm dealing with some paperwork to adjust the use of those funds from design services for the housing, which was the original assumption. And by the way, these funds can only be used for the housing, not for any other municipal use, say on the property or other use. The idea was to lower the bar, the cost to create housing, and in this case, affordable housing as well. So those are housing choice grant funds. And so with those funds, we had done some phase 1 and phase 2 assessment of the property just to know what our hazmat environmental issues were on the site. So we did get some reporting on that. And so with the remaining funds, I have talked with the mayor, I've talked with the 2 ward councilors, both the Ward 1 and Ward 2 councilors. I actually had spoken also to former Ward 2 councilor Jared Argument earlier today about it. And, generally speaking, there seems to be, consensus at this point on this, but we're trying to basically, in a relatively short time frame at this point, still make use of those funds. And the original concern I had, although I was agreeing that we should apply for the grant and we got it, my concern was that if we did not, as a community, nail down some specifics about the adaptive reuse that there was consensus over that we could actually move forward with, it would be hard to spend those funds as originally proposed in the grant, which was to have an architect or design team do design services for us that would lower the cost, for creating those housing units. That becomes difficult if you don't know exactly what the parameters are for the building, because room layouts, utility runs and things like that might be, very different. So you don't want to throw money away. And so in essence, what I have talked to folks here about is to do two things specifically, generally in a relatively short time frame we still have at this point, is to try to do two things. And I, again, open up to suggestions, but recognizing that the sort of constraints we have. We want to do something that will lower the cost for the city, regardless of use of the property, but certainly here for housing under this grant program, and not do something simply ripped out later on. So the ideas that we had are essentially were to remove the oil tank that's underground, which no one would be using on a go-forward basis, remove as potential environmental liability, even though there wasn't a sense that soils were contaminated. It is an issue that we can resolve. And take away any concern for a nonprofit or developer we may partner with on the housing side. So that was one item that will, and I'm talking with Mike Bartlett, the facilities manager, about that. And he's got a proposal from a contractor for that. The other piece was restoration of the windows. Essentially, what you're seeing on the image is the two shorter sides of the building, the school building, would be to renovate those older historic windows. Long story short, in the overlay district for the Brown School, there's an assumption in that overlay district that the windows be preserved. I suspect that will still be something that is raised as a community concern in one way or another. Whether it's a large concern or a small concern, I can't say. But I imagine that the Preservation Trust, and a few others may have concern that the windows be preserved, the building be preserved in some format to the best of our ability. So with that in mind, and recognizing that windows on the building are something that would need some work, in talking with the so-called window woman in Amesbury, we got a quote for what it essentially would take to do the 29 or so windows on the two shorter sides, and recognizing that we can't, unfortunately, with the available funds, do all the windows in the building. That quote was too high. We might be able to do those two shorter sides of the building, and so that has some benefits. One is we know that the windows would have, window work would have to be done on this building. We'd be saving the future, partner of ours, whether it's ourselves, the housing authority, a nonprofit, a developer. We'd be reducing the cost, for that hurdle to get to the housing units, in this case, affordable, to the best of our ability here in the trust perspective. And we're addressing the historic aspect of those windows, and the neighborhood itself hasn't had a whole lot of, or seen a whole lot of improvement to that property, in recent years, because it hasn't been, clear which path we're taking, and so there's been sort of hesitation about investing in the property significantly. But this is something that would actually be a tangible, visible result, let's say, for at least a portion of the neighbors there in relatively short-term time frame, because we know how long it takes to get things mobilization, if you will, of a project, given that we have to start from where we are today and get to, say, zoning changes, maybe disposition of the property, including terms for what that would be, how many units, and so forth. All that stuff takes time, getting a developer proposal in here, finding something that the city thinks is the appropriate scheme, assuming that's where we go, and then getting them under construction. That can take some time. So again, one ancillary benefit of doing that is also here that the residents next door might actually see some improvements being done to the property that are aesthetically maybe appealing. So I open up to discussion and questions, and and how we can be of assistance. Caitlin, unfortunately, isn't here this evening, but how we can be of assistance, obviously, to the mayor, the council, and the trust. But I think there's definitely a great opportunity for partnership here to create housing here, and specifically affordable housing with the Brown School. I think the real tough part, which has always been the conversation point, has been what are those parameters? Whether or not there's any municipal use on the property, NYS or otherwise, which seems to be, I think, sort of moving on as a question here, although I'll defer to the officials who have to make those calls. And what parameters to set for the housing side. There's a 20-unit cap, so does that need to be revised in some way?
Andrew,
Thanks.
I just had
Go ahead, Mia.
just a question. Is there a time limit on the state funds?
Yeah, that's part of the constraint. So we're now down to June 30th of this year. And that's part of the reason for trying to do things that we know are manageable within that time frame. I had talked with Councilor Zeed, the Ward 1 councilor across the street, and trying to work with the two applicable ward councilors, as we try to do in general. His preference in general seemed to be working on the hazmat materials that might be on the property. The primary concern, I think, with that is that it's not clear what the end point with that would be. We'd only be doing part of the hazmat costs, remediation of the building. We don't know if we'd be chasing costs because sometimes we might discover some more and have to do a change order and then, not have enough funds and potentially need to, request a transfer from the council to finish that work. So it makes more sense, I guess, in general, considering a bunch of different parameters, that we try to do something that we know is achievable in that time frame. Having discussed with the grant administrators, the fact that they won't be able to give us necessarily an extension on that time frame.
Andy, is it possible in its pre-development state, and because the building is vacant, can we utilize funds for lighting and safety, perhaps cameras? I know there was some concern about rocks going through the windows or what have you. Is there any issue around safety there, and is it lit?
Yeah, that's a great point. I do think that, and again, I'll defer to Mike Bartlett and Andy Egmont and those folks who were there, who have been there more frequently and dealt with these issues more directly. But window, smashing, if you will, or showing rocks or whatnot, has definitely been an issue. And the facilities manager has certainly noted that on a number of occasions when we've walked through the building with folks to walk through the options and the issues for various reasons, like I just summarized. But I definitely think that's an issue. I think certainly, and again, if we're going to be restoring windows, we want to make sure that those are protected. We had talked, by the way, in the scope of adding storm windows, to the outside, both while they're doing the work and also as a sort of more an extra sort of insulative, measure as well. Yeah, there is an issue there with that. And lighting, certainly, I think generally speaking, the state's guidance to us on shifting those funds from design to construction was it's all very consistent with the original purposes. But it has to be, generally speaking, ensuring the future use for housing or encouraging that in some way. So here, I think an argument certainly could be made that some additional lighting or anything to sort of secure the property would make sure that this property is not further to deteriorate while we're trying to create the housing. And that was one of the reasons for looking to the windows. Mike, by the way, I should also mention a smaller allocation or discussion about cost for roof patching, because that has been the building envelope, obviously being the key feature here. We're trying to take care of. That has been another cost. So yes, that's definitely an option. I guess I'd have to work with some other city officials on what would be appropriate and where. The city electrician, Mike Bartlett, the facilities manager, and perhaps the ward councilor and others, just to kind of get some thoughts on that. But that certainly could be helpful here. And as long as we're able to work out the numbers, that could be done with those funds generally, or some other source of funds if that's needed for some reason.
And funds have to be committed or spent by June 30th.
We have to have spent those funds essentially.
Actually
So
spent. Wow.
that's part of
That's
that.
soon.
Yeah, part of the problem. So it's not one of those things where I can say, let's just encumber them by June 30. I tried to work out, what we could do in that time frame. And again, as I mentioned to Mayor Holliday when she was in office, we were already starting with at the beginning of the grant program a very tight time frame, given the lack of clarity on the some of the specificity of the future adaptive reuse of the property. There was different community sentiments expressed in different meetings and in different forums about what that should be. Obviously, NYS being one focal point for that, and the gym being perhaps another here. So yeah, that's one of my concerns, is just at least at a bare minimum making sure we've used those funds, we've put them into something that we are not throwing away at the end of the day, or wouldn't have to rip out, regardless of what the future use is. But certainly here the expectation being that it's housing. So again, that's why we sort of came to those two things. And short of anything miraculous happening in the next couple of days, I think we really need to get going on those with the vendors, if you will, just to make sure we're staying in time frame, mainly the windows, which are the work that would take time. So.
And they don't have to be installed, right? You could prepay, or the work could be ongoing.
I had actually talked with the window woman. Again, there's other consultants who can do it, but I wanted to get a proposal from a consultant we know there's been reputable experience with, and get some ideas of what the costs were. Based on her time frame, they would be able to accomplish all that work prior to June 30, and so we would obviously. This is a reimbursement grant, by the way, so the city spends the funds, gets the funds reimbursed into that account essentially. But we'd have to have that work done by then. It wouldn't be one of those, sign a contract, pay them up front and do later. Generally speaking, we won't do that anyway, because we might be, chasing the consultant or contractor later on. So.
Andy, I think the underground storage tank removal makes a ton of sense. The window replacement, I think you're saying, my only concern is if the developer who ends up redeveloping the site is going after historic tax credits.
Mm-hmm.
you would want to have the right kind of window installed. So.
Yeah, sorry,
I
just to
don't
be clear, this isn't replacement windows. This would be to
This is
restore the windows.
repairing, to
Yeah.
restore existing windows.
Right. Right. So and I actually was talking with Councilor Agaman today, or former Councilor Agaman today. That was one of the points that he was reminding me of as well. You know, it's in context here, but that those tax credits may be available as long as we're not.
I'm just,
you know,
I guess my concern then is that we have very high energy standards, especially for affordable housing. And it's not only taking into consideration restoring as is, but also, you know, making the building as energy efficient as possible. It's just windows is a big thing, especially with a historic preservation project. And I'm just a little concerned that, you know, you were saying, and we all understand, you don't want to do something that then has to be redone. And so it's sort of taking into consideration, you know, neighborhood safety, historic preservation, and energy efficiency. It's a lot. And windows tends to be one of those very tricky and important details in a housing project like this. So I just caution you that you take all of that into consideration.
Yep. No, definitely have. You know, the again with the shorter time frame, I certainly recognize, and then you know others may feel all right. You know, those windows could be replaced, but I don't think that that's likely to be something that would be immediately you know palatable. That you know, I think we sort of meet with some opposition if we were to propose to say replace those windows right now with replacement windows, recognizing that they could you know based on our review of the windows be restored. Obviously, that would improve the sealants, obviously, on the edges of the windows. They're in relatively good condition, you know, in a number of cases. Some of them have been damaged, of course, as Suzanne mentioned. But the idea is also that there would be storm windows, you know, on the outside, which would add a little bit to that, you know, insulation value, or at least the air passage. So understood, you know, they're all valid concerns here, I guess, but we're sort of under some tight parameters here to do something that's viable within these, you know, overlapping constraints. And I do think, generally speaking, that's been taken into account, which is that the windows will be restored. It would remain, you know, eligible for those tax credits. You know, it's something that would lower the bar or cost later on for someone with the building. Presumably they would not want to replace those windows. They would be happy with the fact that we restore them, and then they would focus on, say, the back windows or even the front windows, the more modern ones in the infill area that might need to be improved for some reason.
Any other comments, questions for Andy?
I have a comment.
Yeah.
If we assume that affordable housing for elderly people is the objective of that building, what's wrong with just going with that objective? And if we put an RFP out and we get solicitations from different developers that will do that project, they will want to do about probably 40 to 50 units total to make it financeability. It's very important. And then they will worry about fixing the windows to the proper historical standards in today's current rules with the federal government, considering the energy requirements. That way, the building can be either sold or whatever, so that somebody can really get to work on this project. We need affordable housing for elderly people. That's the only way to do this.
Yeah, Bob, at least from my perspective, I agree with that, you know, in large part. But again, without having set some of the parameters or having internal consensus on the city side as to what those parameters are, it becomes hard to go out with an RFP, you know, properly on that. So again, we're back to time constraints here, and it doesn't seem that will necessarily align here. We certainly could pass that work on to the developer or nonprofit that we might partner with. But the question then, we're back to the similar question as well. What do we spend those funds on right now? What could be achieved in that time frame that wouldn't necessarily be thrown away by whatever the uses or adaptive work is that's there in the future? And I'm open to, you know, suggestions to how we could do that in that compacted time frame. But you know, that it's just these overlapping considerations, and we just haven't had that clarity. And it sounds like there may be needs to be some tweaking, say, to the bill out allowance for that, like you said.
But the advice from a developer to you, what to do with that several $100,000 may be very well intended, and it can parlay with what they're trying to do with the project. And, you know, you get some good advice from these people. I think we should solicit some advice. And if the mayor wants to go ahead and develop affordable housing in Newburyport, it's a classic approach to doing it. Right, Mayor?
Yes. Sorry. Andy, does that make sense though to, I mean, even just seek some advice from a developer? I mean, it obviously doesn't have to be the one that we'll eventually partner with, but like just to see, you know, what, you know, they might have an idea that we're not thinking of. I don't know. I'm just asking.
Yeah, well, all I can tell you is if we can certainly look for more feedback at this point, but the reality is that having discussed various different options that we have, you know, at our disposal at this point, given the timeframe of the grant and so forth, there is nothing that you know really has come up that would be viable at this point. You know, I had looked originally, I thought, well, you know, we know the elevators, you know, inadequate. We'd have to replace the elevators. So maybe the design services are spent on the elevator work. We could do, you know, some design work associated with the units, you know, to get that going, get that base going. But it became obvious we weren't going to be able to close the loop on some of these parameters, which, you know, we could get, you know, thoughts from developers and nonprofits on what work would be appropriate. But remember that, you know, each day or week or month, you know, that goes on as we get sort of that feedback, we're running out of time to actually do work with those funds. And I don't have the sense, having looked at all the different building, you know, elements, if you will, a sense of any other work that we could possibly do that wouldn't necessarily be undone by someone else later on. All the utility, the building is structurally fine, you know, it's generally, but it's built like a rock, but the all the utilities in the building would have to be replaced. You know, windows, obviously, like I've talked about, no work would have to be done. It's not clear what's happening exactly with the gym space or the, you know, interstitial space, as I call it, you know, there in between. So without some of those parameters being set, it becomes hard to see that us or them necessarily picking something to do that won't necessarily be, you know, revised by someone else down the road. So, you know, it's.
Andy, given, give us an idea of if we, I mean, clearly the city council has an ad hoc committee that's being constituted right now. And under the best circumstances, if we hold everyone's feet to the fire, how long do you think it would take to get to RFP? Like what, in terms of timeline, how soon can we get to that process?
I mean, we certainly if we were really fast, throw feet to the fire, like you say, I mean, we could by end of spring, you know, summertime, have an RFP out in the street, you know, be looking for proposals from nonprofits and developers. But I think that primarily comes back to the discussions the council would have to, you know, and I think in the context of something you're familiar with, look at the Brown School Overlay District or any other types of provisions in zoning, because that is one primary limitation right now is the cap of 20 units. And again, I'm not, you know, taking issue with that, but it certainly has been expressed to us from nonprofits and developers that number is not realistic, given the amount of expenditure that would have to be done on this building to renovate it and create those units. And still, we need to have some clarity with respect to the gym space and how that may directly or indirectly impact what site space is available, or whether or not any addition or modification might be done to the Brown School building relation to the housing. So if we could nail down those specifics, you know, in very short order, you know, a couple months, it would be, you know, relatively straightforward to prepare an RFP and get it out in the street at that point. But largely that's before the council, I think, at this point, in relation with the mayor. So.
Can I ask, maybe it's a question for you, Mayor, or for Andy, how much of a priority is this? I mean, you know, I know there's lots of things the city has to juggle. How much of a priority is this compared to maybe other issues that are on the table in terms of getting an overlay district, you know, maybe amended to make it more financially feasible?
I'll let Andy answer, but I'll just say, I mean, I think it is a priority. I think, you know, especially with, you know, coming out of budget and finance, knowing that we're going to move forward, it looks like on January 31st with the purchase of 57 Low Street. You know, part of that was looking at the viability of the gym. So, I mean, those things are going to happen here in the next couple of months where, you know, I think that will give us a path to move forward on, you know, other uses for the Brown School. And as Suzanne mentioned, you know, I met with President Heather Shan today talking about the ad hoc. So you know, I think we're moving in the right direction, but I mean, I think, you know, there's a couple more dominoes that have to fall first, especially particularly around, you know, what's going to happen with the gym, I mean, I think if we have if the council has a better idea of what the costs would be, and, then talking about the benefits possibly of retaining the gym, I think they need some solid answers there, but then we can move forward with, dealing with the Brown School part. Andy, does that sound about right? Or
Yeah, I would agree with the mayor on that. And I would say just, again, having been here for a couple of years, there's been, I want to say stagnation, but there has been ability to move forward on some of these particulars with the Brown School property or building. And I think we have an opportunity now, to do that. And I think as a land use planning matter, it's a priority project for the Office of Planning and Development, for the city, various city entities. The planning board, some of the members there are obviously interested in the housing aspect of this. We have obviously advocates on the Housing Trust and others who have come to many numerous meetings. We have a neighborhood who obviously wants to see something done to clean up this property and, make a viable adaptive reuse of it. So it definitely seems like a priority project in terms of city property. And I would also say, frankly, from the although the affordable housing is the primary need and the primary focus we should all be having, we also have the question of 40B and what units are being added to our subsidized housing inventory, and the so-called safe harbor status that the community has or may be able to maintain. So one thing to keep in mind is that while we may have a safe harbor during a 2-year period, while the Minko project is expected to be approved in the coming weeks, from say a threatened 40B we may not think is appropriate in Newburyport for various reasons, that is only a 2-year freeze, if you will, the way that the process works in some. So as a consequence, it becomes very important for us to, not just the affordable units themselves, but if we want to maintain the city's, protected status from projects that may not be appropriate for various reasons, it would be important to make sure that we're producing additional units, whether by, the zoning, the permitting, or development itself, to make sure that we keep doing that, because otherwise we're not making any progress in that second year. When it transitions to the third, we're out of that safe harbor status as well. So again, this property is the primary resource we have as a city right now to create those units, aside from say additional funds from the trust or the CPC, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, this has been, we really do owe it to the neighborhood. We desperately need the units in the city as the housing costs continue to soar. People just have nowhere to go, and it's just time. And so I'd really love to see this, from the city council making this a #1 priority, and just like give them a time, like a deadline almost, and say we need to come to consensus by this date so we can be shovel ready by X, or something. But it's time to push here. Sorry.
Agreed. For what it's worth.
And this office obviously will continue to assist. There's a little bit of back and forth between the mayor's office and council's office over the years about some of the particulars, and even individual councilors about the particulars. But I think we have, it seems like there's a lot of enthusiasm and interest on the part of the councilors, this term to focus on the Brown School. And as the mayor said, this is, a priority area for us to focus on. We certainly have an opportunity here. So like you said, I think if we can close some loops with the council on some of these parameters and issues that have been raised about, say the gym or the zoning constraints that may or may not work for the partners we may work with, then it becomes viable for us to get an RFP out the street to actually, bring that to fruition. And we've seen other projects in other communities where schools have been adaptively reused, including, as I mentioned at the building walkthrough, a Brown school in the city of Peabody that had an addition on the back, but very comparable, I guess, in terms of the original building work. We have an opportunity here. And I think that a lot of that rests with trying to work with the counselors on something that is palatable and workable from their perspective.
Yes.
Yeah,
And the theme of giving up a little and getting a lot, we all have to be willing and know that we're not going to get everything we want, but we need to be willing to get to closure here.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I hope that the trust has an opportunity to serve, if a task force or a subcommittee is formed to pursue the redevelopment, that the Housing Trust is able to have a representative on that.
yeah, I can just tell you with my conversations with Council President Shan that was the idea, was to have 2 members of the Affordable Housing Trust on that ad hoc. So
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Mayor, she will appoint the 2 members. Is that correct?
that's my understanding. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Either that or she was going to consult with the chairs. So, I mean, I think that's the direction we're going in.
Wonderful. Great.
I just have a quick question for Andrew. Who makes the final decision on how we'll spend that money? And is there any way to revisit the toxic material removal, maybe focus on a certain area?
Yeah, that's great questions. Ultimately speaking, it's up to the mayor. But as I've outlined to the mayor, because again, in short order, I have had to work with a new mayor transitioning to, sort of a lot of background, trying to figure out what can we do in 6 months without, and sort of hit the ground running. So it is ultimately speaking the mayor's call. What I have tried to do is present what I think are viable options for us, in the time frame and the constraints that we have, and that's why I presented these two things. The hazmat removal, we certainly could look to do that. However, we only got basically a ballpark estimate from the consultants, and as we certainly have experienced over the years with various capital projects like the wastewater treatment facility revetment, rail trail project, the garage project, we had some costs for asbestos, removal, and it was basically backfilled soil from historic use of the site. We encounter materials and we find that it's not the original assessment of the cost, but actually additional costs that come along with that as we chase, the issue. So that is not as quantifiable. And as I talked about with former Councilor Agaman, earlier today, we know from experience with some of these projects, and certainly some of you have had experience with these as well, that is harder to know that we will stay within budget at this point. And we certainly are not going to cover, all of that hazmat. We're only be covering a fraction or percentage of it. So it doesn't seem wise to me to spend the monies on that when we're not sure we complete anything. We're not even sure we can complete a coherent area without, running into a problem. And we're certainly not going to clean up the property for everybody, there. There's a lot more, potential liability and a baggage that may come from going that route and trying to do that in a relatively short order.
Thank you.
Let's come back to that next meeting and see where we are on that decision. We'd love an update if possible.
Yeah, sure. And I'm sorry, just, to be frank, and I'll defer to the mayor entirely on this, but literally every day counts on this. So that was part of the reason why, my hope was working with the mayor and having talked to the councilors that we'd be able to just get going on these contracts right away, because like I said, it literally waiting between committee meetings, every couple of weeks just wouldn't provide sufficient time to even, to do the tank removal might be feasible, but things like the window work or anything else that someone might want to throw on the table, depending on what that is, if there's some other idea that might be viable, even that getting that mobilized may be an issue given where we are right now. So again, I'm just trying to keep that in mind, I guess.
Yeah, I vote for tank, windows, and lighting and safety. We want safety around that building.
Yeah, I will talk with Mike Bartlett, the city electrician, about the lighting side of it, because I think frankly that goes hand in hand, not only with the site safety, but in general. But if we're going to restore windows and try to make sure adaptive reuse of that property and not any further deterioration, we also have to make sure there's no vandalism. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to move us along. I'm getting off of my promise to you of 1 hour meetings here. Andy, did you have something else in inclusionary zoning?
I guess just a comment on that. I mean, Caitlin might have wanted to comment if she was here. Generally speaking, we had talked a little bit internally, and I don't know, I'm not privy to all the conversations you've had in recent months, only because there were some meetings where I had conflicts or I had to attend another meeting. So, but I knew there's been some discussion perhaps amongst the trust and for ourselves internally about whether or not, for instance, the 6-unit threshold that's in the inclusionary ordinance, whether we'd want to tweak that or look to have an adjustment for financial contribution for projects that are smaller than 6 units. But, looking to where that ordinance has or has not been used, since it's, amendment or adoption, looking to see if there's anything else we can do to bolster what we get out of the inclusionary ordinance. And of course, there's other areas where we can leverage inclusionary units, whether it's, forgetting the inclusionary ordinance itself, that one section of the ordinance. There are other places where we can see that happen, the 40R district or whatever the parameters are, set or reset for Waterfront West. There are other areas where we can create affordable units with an inclusionary, component. So I guess I would defer large part to what the inputs of the Housing Trust members are here and the mayor, on if you have any thoughts on what you'd like to see there. Caitlin and I are happy to work on, revisions and so forth. But I think the main thing that I've heard mentioned was the question of whether or not we could get an additional financial contribution for affordable units the city may need to do, with smaller contributions, say, whether it's $50,000 because someone's doing a 3-unit or 4-unit project or whatnot. There was a 4-unit project proposed on State Street. There was question raised about whether or not any units would be created. 1 unit might be created out of the 4 there for affordable purposes because it's below the 6-unit threshold, or whether or not a project of that size could at least contribute some dollar amount, $50,000, $100,000, given the market rate value of housing in Newburyport right now. That might not be necessarily unreasonable, whatever that number is. So those are things that I've heard discussed, and open up to you if you have suggestions for us you want us to look to, as we're always looking to update codes that might be in ways that might be beneficial.
Karen, do you want to insert your multifamily? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so sort of in that whole zoning discussion, I mean, there's the 40R district, there's inclusionary zoning. Is the planning office working on or aware, I'm sure you're aware, but to back up for a moment, sorry, in the economic development bill that was passed by the state last year, it said that communities with an MBTA stop had to zone for multifamily dwellings within half a mile, and there's all these complicated, formulas around it. But I didn't know how much our 40R district already encompasses that, or how much we want to look at that. And I know the regs just came out, more specific about how to do that. And there's not a requirement for affordable within that, but I thought it'd be great if we have to do another district, I don't know, again, maybe it's all 40R, but if it's not, to see how we could apply inclusionary or better there.
Yeah, well, again, I guess my comment on that or just initial thoughts are, I have looked at the guidance. This is the MBTA communities guidance coming out of the housing choice legislation. And in summary, what it says right now, the Department of Housing and Community Development has taken the authority they were granted by the legislature to determine what is a reasonable, residential smart growth district around these MBTA stations. They have determined that, in essence, our 40R district, which originally, as you see on this map here, the original calculation, following some state guidelines as to how that's done, assumed a roughly 540 unit build out in the district. Now, this is, in some ways optimistic because it assumes redevelopment of existing properties that have uses on them where, say you've got the hardware store and so forth on the sub-district B area, as you see there. So there's the assumption that I think, as you can tell right now, the low-hanging fruit of properties has already been pursued by Minco. The MBTA site, the ambulance site, with 1 and 3 Boston Way, and now the Haley site that's in permitting right now. Those I would describe as possibly low-hanging fruit, mainly because there weren't really strong, viable uses on the property previously, or ones that were very active per se. And so there was already lots of discussion about redevelopment for those properties. So I think that there'll be continued work on redevelopment potential with those other properties, but it may come a little slower and a little bit more complicated than, say, the ones we've seen thus far, the 3 we've seen thus far. But in essence, they've said that the district, the total build out would have to more than double. So I think it's just under 1,300 units they would expect us to create in this district. Well, the area of the district is literally like point something under the 50-acre requirement that they had. So we're very close to that. We could easily amend it, to add some area. I guess I would say that the unit count, it seems to be of more concern and potentially problematic for Newburyport, unless you plan on having skyscrapers or substantially redeveloping the business park or Back Bay neighborhood. I have talked with folks like Rick Tainter on the planning board about how sort of an irregularly, designed district may satisfy some of these requirements, but there's different ways of cutting that. But I guess the first thing I would say is that we have to have a hearing as a community, and I'll be coordinating more with the mayor and the council president and others on this, but the community has to hold a hearing before May, basically summarizing, what the situation is here, and providing essentially feedback to the state. From that process as to any concerns we have and what we might be able to do here. It seems to me that initial feedback that I would be giving to DHCD and that the community, I assume, would be doing as an entity, in a larger body, multiple city officials, collectively through that hearing process in the coming weeks or months. I imagine that's going to be to DHCD that may be a little aggressive and that what they're looking for may need to be pared down a bit in terms of number of unit count or something like that. And I think my sense is that's pretty consistent with what they're going to hear from other communities in the region or in the Commonwealth. just in context, the expectation there for build out and what can be done. There is that's partly why they allowed a comment period. That's partly why they have a delayed, impact on our ability to apply for state grants, so they can figure out what they're doing there. But my sense is that number will be tailored back in some way before the guidelines are finalized. And I think this is an opportunity for each community to weigh in. And it seems to me that we need to weigh in, at least in part, that that's very aggressive unless we're really substantially increasing the size of the district. And I'm not sure that that's palatable to the council. This district, had some hesitation, at least from a few councilors, when at the time it was adopted.
So two questions about that, and thank you. That was very, very helpful, Andy. So one, I guess, is from my perspective and from this meeting, the Affordable Housing Trust, I just want to make sure that whatever it's zoned for, whatever number it is, that we are able to maximize affordable housing there. And certainly if it's expanding the 40R district, I forget if that's 25 or 30%, but that's more than if it's just inclusionary zoning. So I would, and plus the city gets benefits from that. But anyway, however it works, I would want to advocate for that amount of affordable housing in the district.
And just to be clear, right now, the requirement is we had the bare minimum we had to do of 20%. We specifically chose at the time we brought this forward to draft it, and it's adopted with a 25% requirement. And that's,
I tried for
we
30.
wanted to make sure, one, we get additional units out of that, the additional 5%, but two, we also get credit for all those, if there's a rental project, for all those units on the SHI. And so that's specifically why we did that. So as of right now, and I wouldn't necessarily expect that to change in the district, it's 25% of those units that would have to be affordable.
Okay, and then my second question is, I understand that communities that are contiguous have to plan as well. So are we in talks with the town of Newbury about kind of their side of things, or?
Yeah, that's one of the conversations we're going to be going to next. We wanted to have a little bit of an internal conversation amongst us. I wanted to flag this issue for the mayor, coming in, and because again, this is relatively recent guidance that we even got from the Commonwealth. And so with a couple of, the planning board members we've talked to about, well, already the chair and the vice chair who've been there for some time and, have a lot of background with this, these sort of issues, talk with some of the counselors about, these sort of issues as we might be facing, adjustments that we might need to do, or our ability to apply for state grants might be limited if we're not able to achieve what the state is, is saying as a guide in here. Yeah, again, I'm happy to answer any other questions, but that's, I guess, as much background as I have at the moment.
That's great. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you for all of that. So Robert, Bob,
Yes.
very, very quickly, top line, just give us your other ideas for affordable housing sites.
One of the things I first did is I reviewed the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission report in 2017 that encouraged affordable housing development in the city. They also wanted to inventory public land for affordable housing and to partner with nonprofits and private companies to provide affordable housing. So I picked 3 sites. One is the Morrill House on High Street, which is a dilapidated Federalist, which could be partnered with the Historic Commission. We could get CPA funds between the two of us to get that started, turn it over to a developer if the owner decides they want to sell. But that's a project that needs to be saved. The second one is the housing for aged men up at 360 High Street, 361, which has all kinds of land with it. It's a private organization. It's that the right-hand side of it is adjacent to the city of Newburyport's public housing. Need to approach them to see if they would be willing to provide affordable housing on the right side of their property. And I think that's a doable project. So the third project I had in mind was the Mercer project on Merrimack Street. That's a commercially zoned building in a residential neighborhood. That building is underutilized. They tried several years ago to come to the city to use the parking lot for apartment houses, and market rate housing didn't work. So now I think it could be done for affordable housing. So you could take that whole project, it's on the waterfront, do say 50% affordable, 50% market rate, and make it a 50-50 deal and put about 150 units of each in it and do it. It's on the bus line, it's ready to go. So the federal money that's available right now is coming down the pike, that $650 million for affordable housing for elderly and veterans. And if we could partner with some of that money, not we, but the developer, they could use it to take a big project like this and make it work. And that's the 3 projects I think are identifiable, that are viable, and down the road a piece, something could happen. Thank you, Andy, for the pictures of these.
Sure. Yeah. One thing I could add, if I could, I would strongly suggest, and I think I mentioned this, Bob and I spoke the other day about some of these possibilities he had mentioned. This is, obviously the assumption here is we're working with the private sector or the nonprofit sector in some ways, as opposed to city property like the Brown School. And there's potential there. One of the things I think is extremely important from experience here, obviously, it should go without saying, is reaching out to the ward counselors and coordinating with them so that there's early coordination on things rather than, running into problems later on or disputes over, what the parameters are, what's reasonable for abutters and so forth.
Absolutely. Absolutely correct. Reaching out, that's your job. But I think my job is to identify them and figure out if there's a possibility of them doing something and then go from there.
Geez, Bob, why do we need a housing production plan? We have you.
Well, that's what I used to do. And it's tricky. It's not that easy. And it's identifying them and then talking to these people and figuring out. It takes several years to do an affordable housing project. It takes years. I was working on one in Taunton for 5 years, still hasn't closed. So it takes time to get it all done. And if they're willing to do something like that, that's ideal for a bigger developer. And there are some big ones out there.
I would actually, if I could just note relative to the Brown School, I apologize for sort of circling back on the Brown School for a moment, but one thing that I think was brought up that might be relevant is during Mayor Holliday's administration towards the tail end, in discussions with Councilor Eigenman, I think, and a few others, there was perhaps an assumption that it might be best aligned for the city to work with the housing authority on units on the Brown School. And I think that part probably was at least in part at the time with the assumption that NYS would stay at the site and that there'd be a smaller, portion of the site or building to be used by the city, and therefore maybe more viable to work with the housing authority that's sort of an established entity here that has units. I think the cost of the building are a little bit more substantial than, say, it could be done, at that scale, which is part of the reason why we have this discussion of the 20 units in the zoning district. But it might be helpful for the mayor and I, for instance, to hear if the trust members, who've worked on the affordable housing, projects throughout, communities and in different ways over the years, your thoughts on the pros and cons of, say, only working with the housing authority versus working with nonprofits or developers, and the way that we did the RFP last time, where we just, open to developers and nonprofits to see what they can propose and then rank those. My sense generally from experience is it's best to have the broadest possible proposals to us and not necessarily assume we're working with only one entity. But I just, it might be helpful for us to hear your thoughts on that too, because it's a potential parameter for disposition down the road.
Yeah.
Andy,
Go ahead, Madeline.
I was going to say that I agree with you that I don't see the advantage to limiting it to the housing authority. We have spoken with the housing authority director, and I wasn't clear on their interest or capacity, but some housing authorities are starting to do development. For many years they really weren't, but we do see it. So I wouldn't rule it out, but I think it is better to open it up. And we know that there are some nonprofits on the North Shore that are very capable and have worked on school conversions. So I guess I would think that it would be better to have a broader field. I don't see the advantage personally to limiting it to the housing authority.
I agree.
I would agree.
I agree. I agree. Don't limit it.
Yeah, no.
All right. Well, that's certainly helpful. Thank you.
And while we're circling back, I just want to make sure we have a discussion on the agenda next time about what Andy raised about the inclusionary zoning units, because I think that is important to look at that. I'm glad that was raised.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wanted to say that, thank you, Karen, that we have included in that draft strategic plan what Bob was talking about, which is, finding ways to identify potential development sites and thinking about the best way to move forward on that. It's sort of a tricky thing being a trust member, because when we're out in the community, we're really just speaking as individual residents of Newburyport. We're not authorized to go out and represent the trust on our own. If we want to think about potential development sites that are privately owned, perhaps that should be done, as Andy said, first, speaking with the ward counselor and then maybe the planning department, figuring out the best way to proceed, possibly inviting a property owner to meet with the trust. I mean, there's different approaches, but I think we have to be mindful that as trust members, we can't be out in the field making deals. So while it might be tempting, but again, I wanted to say that this is on the agenda. I mean, I'm sorry, it's included in the strategic plan for our discussion at our next meeting, identifying sites, trying to figure out how best to potentially pursue them. And that would be something that would be included in our next housing production plan. Of course, I don't think we want to wait till then, but this can be an ongoing discussion of, how to pursue potential development opportunities.
That's so well put, Madeline. Thank you. And I think, we're really changing from a reactive body to a more proactive body, and really looking for opportunities versus waiting for things to come our way. So I appreciate your input, Bob, and Madeline, for articulating that so well. Thank you. Okay, I want to move us along. Do we have any other updates from the planning director?
No, again, I'm happy to elaborate on anything you might have questions about, but not at the moment. Thank you.
Okay. As Madeline mentioned earlier, we have a new round of emergency rental assistance and also moving assistance that will be coming, being launched after we brief the Planning and Development Committee. We just want to, when we get CPC funding to do something, we'd like to report back. So we're trying to establish this feedback loop so that everyone knows. And of course, the city council, they do have constituents, so they will be able to address any needs they have from their own constituents. So if you recall, there are three categories. One is COVID related expense. One is, the second is a temporary loss of a job or some temporary situation that won't allow you to pay your full rent. And the third is moving into a new apartment or house that would help with first, last security or broker fee. So really exciting, really glad to see that. Thank you all for all your work at our workshop a few months back. So we're ready to go there. Quickly, this is just so go ahead, Madeline.
I wanted to mention applying to the CPC
Right.
some funds coming up. The deadline for applications is February 3rd. All of a sudden, that's really soon. And so I wanted to propose two requests for funds. And these are things that we've touched on in the past. One would be to request $30,000 to cover the cost for finding a new consultant to help us update our housing production plan. The housing production plan that we have right now doesn't expire, I think, until 2023, but we have learned from past experience that it takes a while to put out an RFP, to identify a new consultant, and to get them under contract. So I don't, and of course the funding has to be approved by the CPC and then the city council. So it takes a while for all these steps to go through. So I don't see any reason to delay. And I don't think that's too controversial. We've done this twice before. We can do it again. We know how to do it. The second thing I would propose is $200,000 application to the CPC for setting aside funds for new housing, affordable housing development. So we've done this in the past as well, where we haven't identified the site, but we've made a case that we know that if a developer is seeking state funds to affordable housing tax credits, state subordinate funds, they're going to be competing with other developers around the state, and the city has to have a local match of some sort to help them compete for those funds. So it's setting aside money that the trust would manage to support the affordable housing development. And that could be for the Brown School, but I would recommend that we not limit it to the Brown School. So I don't know if anybody wants to talk about this. I had mentioned it to Caitlin today to see whether or not she would be able to work on preparing applications in time for that deadline of February 3rd. But I wanted to make sure we touched on it tonight.
I think that's very, very, very important. For example, Hamilton just did a 18 unit. It was call it a friendly 40B project, half of which was affordable, half of which was market rate, downtown Hamilton. And the city of Hamilton gave the developer $550,000 towards the 50% affordability of that project. They changed it from 25 to 50. They took the extra money and they did it. Its completion is in the spring of 2022. It's almost done. And it is a perfect sized small project, but takes CPA funds in conjunction. So yes, Madeline, that's a very important point. And we can do that every year and add to that pool. And the other thing is we don't have a representative on that commission that decides all this spending. Is that correct? Do we? That's correct. But 25% of it goes to affordable housing.
10%.
Just 10.
Wish it was 25. It
Yeah.
could be, but they have to set aside 10% for affordable housing.
Okay.
That's the minimum.
If you do a project like the Moral House, where you take the historical aspects of the building and you take the affordableness of the building, and you put those two together, you can get some serious money out of the CPA funds to help get that to work.
Well, I want to concur, Bob. I agree. It's important. And Madeline, I think those are great suggestions. And I would ask that you make a motion that we, that we apply for that, because I would support that.
Go ahead, make a motion.
Okay, I move that we submit applications to the CPC for the February 3rd deadline. One application requesting $30,000 to support the recruitment and hiring of a consultant to help us with our housing production plan. And secondly, $200,000 to be earmarked for affordable housing development.
I second that motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any nays? Motion passed.
Thank you, Madeline.
Thank you.
Madeline.
Thank you, Madeline. That's great. Before we hit, Madeline and Karen and I have to vote on minutes from, what were the meeting dates? Most of you were not here, but we were here. So if we can just do it as a group, just name the dates and we'll go ahead and.
Okay, could we just say that I make a motion to approve the.
Wait, I can tell you. Yeah.
Oh, good.
May and June.
Sorry.
See, we need Caitlin.
No. I'm sorry. Hold on, guys. Okay. Motion to approve the minutes from May 6th, 2021, June 17th, 2021, and That's all I have here, are the two. Were there three?
No, 2.
Okay, for those 2 dates.
I think we hadn't had quorums, as I recall, to actually approve those. That's why we were going backwards. You know, we've
Yes.
looked at one since then. But yeah.
Right, right.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Our next meeting date is, we're proposing March 3rd at 6 o'clock.
So I won't be able to make that, but you can go ahead without me. I'm kind of not going to be around the month of March.
Okay, how is everyone else? Is that working for everyone else?
Works for
Sounds
me.
good. Yep.
Good. Okay, good. Well, we'll check back to make sure we have a quorum for that day. Sorry, Karen, that you won't be able to join us. Anything else for the good of the order?
I just have I just want to interject that the YWCA is doing a homeless count in February. If anyone's interested, I believe it's February 23rd. If you're interested, contact me. And we usually, the YW coordinates the count, and talking with the police departments, the nonprofits in town that deal with the homeless, the schools and things like that. And we have in the past also walked to certain sections of the city. And it has been before dark because it's just easier and safer to be out at that time. So if anyone's interested, just let me know.
Thank you.
Thank you. I know it's homeless census season. I had forgotten about ours.
Yeah, it's a little
Thank you.
later. Usually it's in January, but it's gonna be more February.
Great. Thank you, Mio.
Mhm.
Anyone else?
I'll just say thank you for a very productive meeting. I think our new co-chairs are doing a wonderful job, and Mayor, it's wonderful to have you here, and our new members, and it's all very hopeful.
Yeah.
Right.
Great.
Thanks, Karen.
Okay.
Everybody.
Motion to adjourn at 7:16.
So moved.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Good night. Enjoy your
Good night.
dinner.
Thank
Good
you.
night, everybody.
Good night.